The clothes make the man. The clothes, and the furniture, and the cars, and the lawn care equipment. Rabid consumerism has given us the chance to flaunt our affluence without doing anything so crass as naming a net worth, and, in some cases, superfluous material goods allow us some leeway in displaying our wealth. Where there are expensive products, there must also be a bottomless pit of a bank account, despite the probability that said bank account was scooped dry to purchase said products. Beyond the necessity of income to survive in a currency-based world, the accumulation of material goods implies a higher quality of life, more available resources, and, albeit subconsciously, an ascended form of humanity. The human beings in Part 1 of Netflix's The House may look nearly identical in their simplistic needle-felt character designs, but their situations within the class system of their time vary considerably. Blue-collar Raymond is reminded of his place in the world by a visit from his wealthy aunt, who makes a point of commenting on his utilitarian home and lack of expensive food, going so far as to disparage his late father, who she also made no effort to help. After watching Raymond suffer this soul-crushing condescension, the viewer shouldn't be surprised when he is taken in by the glamour and prestige of an even wealthier individual, a famous architect who has seen such incalculable success that he promises to let Raymond's family live in his new mansion, free of charge, purely to achieve his artistic vision. While Raymond and his wife Penny are mesmerized by the sheer scope of the house, as well as its luxurious furniture and fixings, daughter Mabel is unsettled by its labyrinthine layout and influx construction. Unlike her parents, who have slipped into a facade of wealth, Mabel hasn't lost her natural identity. She doesn't consider the value of any material goods or wonder how she should identify herself. She only knows that she has been removed from the warmth of her home. Her parents are enthralled to an apparently supernatural degree by the contents of the house, chairs and curtains no more functional than their own, and settle into their new situation, comfortable in the fact that they now possess a greater wealth of material goods than their relatives, despite still being penniless. And for the architect behind the house, always watching from the shadows, allowing this poor family to believe his possessions are theirs was a small price to pay for his new belongings. The man who has everything has now bartered for the ultimate priceless possession, the human soul. Raymond and Penny are not servants or even slaves. They have given themselves willingly over to the house, and not even for financial compensation, but in exchange for the appearance of affluence, the physical goods that allow them to identify as wealthy people. For the chance to immediately ascend to what they believe is the top, they have forsaken their meager yet personal possessions, Raymond going so far as to laugh when their old house is torn down, and abandoned their sense of unity as well as humanity to bask in the awe of their new lifestyle, unaware that the architect is using them as his playthings the same way that Mabel played with her dolls.
How do you do, Auntie Eleanor?
Even the architect's manservant reaches his breaking point, crying out that he can't play this role anymore, but Raymond and Penny never reach this conclusion. The architect has ascended to a level of humanity that even Raymond's aunt couldn't hope to achieve. In a world where a greater wealth of superfluous objects implies greater divinity, what could create a more powerful sense of domination than owning other humans, not as chattel slaves, but as emblems of stature that you molded yourself? It isn't until Raymond and Penny are physically transformed into the furniture they so admired, a gradual yet shocking transition, that they repent of their materialism and beg Mabel to escape. They willingly, if subconsciously, sacrifice their humanity, becoming mere dolls in the toy box of an ascended being, but when they are no longer capable of ignoring their own decisions, they realize what mattered most all along: their humanity, and their freedom, regardless of what they owned or who disparaged them. Mabel escapes with her sister, but Raymond and Penny burn along with the house, finally aware that they had been drawn in by the promise of prestige and material wealth, and that they are left to pay the price for the sins of their betters. Maybe the architect allowed himself to die as well, realizing that he had nothing left to achieve after reducing human beings into mere furniture. Or maybe he watched the house burn from afar, smirking to himself, believing that the deaths of those inside was ultimate proof that they were no more human than the furniture when compared to a god such as himself. When thinking along these lines, a clear parallel emerges within the house, as one remembers that the architects of our modern world have already lit the spark and are cackling in amusement as their formerly human possessions are engulfed in flames, their world destroyed and their society fallen to pieces. These ascended masters, who have reached a near-divine stature through acquiring material wealth and shedding their inconvenient sense of empathy, will watch their dolls burn without a second thought, because they have already insulated themselves and their preferred possessions from the blaze. A flood that destroys a village won't even wet the shoes of those living atop a mountain. 99% of humanity lost wealth during the first 2 years of the pandemic, while the 10 richest men more than doubled their net worth from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion. While climate change and a pandemic haven't even begun to even the scales, or at the very least to prevent those in subjugation from kissing the feet of those who silently consider themselves superhuman, fiction such as Planet of the Apes allows us to visualize a world where an external force finally evens the playing field, proving that all humans are equal, and none are more equal than others. In 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, an eerily prescient virus spreads across the globe, killing billions and revealing the humans' superfluous belongings for the useless knickknacks that they are. There are no more billionaires, no more bottom lines, and no more humans who can convince themselves that they possess a divine spark that others lack. The remaining humans have been driven together by a common enemy. First the pandemic, then the hyper-intelligent apes, who threaten to not only dominate the world by force, but to negate humanity's purpose simply by existing. Before one can even argue that some human beings deserve to be the property of others, one has to establish that humans are the most advanced creatures on the planet, and that we deserve to rule over those with lesser minds. The intelligent apes threaten to expose this fallacy as no more than confirmation bias, and this issue is exacerbated in War for the Planet of the Apes, where a mutated virus renders humans mute and feral. Those who remain, without any liquid wealth or access to natural resources, can only wonder whether it was the intelligence or the human form that allowed us to dominate for so long, and whether there is any way to argue for human dominance when humans have been robbed of everything that made them believe in their own superiority. The intelligence of Homo sapiens is what allowed us to rise victorious over the hundreds of species stronger and better at killing than we are. The abilities to wield tools, construct defenses, and plan coordinated attacks more than compensated for our lack of natural defenses. However, our skyrocketing civilization has far outpaced our evolution. While our iconic brains first developed nearly 100,000 years ago, we have moved from simple agriculture to asking the brain that controls our home to order us man-made nutrients delivered by self-driving carriage in the short span of 6,500 years. The second part of the house highlights not only the complexity of our modern world, but the futility of trying to build on our shaky foundations. While there isn't a single human character, this viciously unsettling half-hour forces the viewer to wonder if we've really evolved past the last common ancestor, or if we've merely slapped a coat of paint on a caveman and called it a child of God. The developer is clearly a nervous wreck, fielding calls from debt collectors and trying to keep the vermin at bay in time for his open house, but like so many in the modern world, he has embraced the grind and decided to put 110% into his project, going so far as to sleep in the bug-infested basement and fire his crew to save money. He's encouraged by phone calls with his significant other, but becomes increasingly fed up with the way his fixer-upper is turning out, feeling his patience and his very psyche begin to fracture like the house around him. We are presented with the developer as a seemingly intelligent and hard-working man, able to think on his feet and fix problems as they occur. But when it is revealed that his continuous phone calls were being made to his dentist, with whom the developer apparently has an unhealthy obsession, the viewer begins to wonder at the state of the developer's mind. Is he really as intelligent and competent as he appears, or is this all an act built to cover up the shaky foundations of his sanity, the same way he repairs the house with easy fixes instead of doing the job right? Although everyone in this world is an anthropomorphic rat, the prospective buyers who force their way into the house have a distinctly bug-like quality that the developer doesn't seem to notice. Neither is it mentioned that, to the viewer, rats must seem an equally invasive species as cockroaches. The developer defines himself as the rightful ruler of this domain. After all, he paid money for the house, while the insects are offensive interlopers, regardless of who was here first. He draws a line in the sand, but the strange couple and their visiting family blur this line with their appearance alone, silently proposing the question of what makes the developer so different from the bugs, who must see him and the other rats as an invasive species. The developer doesn't notice that many of the newcomers have more limbs than they're supposed to, and some even sport an insect-like thorax. They are the missing link between the civilized, intelligent developer and the mindless cockroaches he's been trying to massacre. They are the straw that broke the camel's back, a slap in the face to everything the developer and the viewer have been taught about the natural superiority of their people.
Time to get you home.
Being welcomed into a house he once owned by the insectoid rats leads to a total break in the developer's already tenuous psyche, and rather than going insane the way a human being might, he reverts to a form the viewer will recognize: a rat. After walking on two legs, charging his phone, and waxing poetic about marble countertops imported from Italy, the developer has paid off the Chekhov's gun of his visual appearance, returning to the animalistic form that the viewer will have been picturing from the start. The de-evolution of the developer may have felt like a foregone conclusion to the viewer, but only because of our preconceived ideas of what makes an intelligent mammal. The rats of our world lack intelligence, but didn't we too at one point? Far back in the eons deep mist of world history, was there not an evolutionary ancestor of Homo sapiens whose intellect matched that of a modern beetle? We have the brain power to split the atom and land on the moon, but assuming we were not bestowed with divinity by a higher power, aren't we also part of the animal kingdom? Aren't our emotions and even our intellectual decisions based primarily on instinct? With the world growing as complicated as it has, and with billions of people caught in a mad struggle to gain the most material wealth, how far do we really stand from the same abyss that the developer was dragged into? Wouldn't de-evolution into an animalistic state be a welcome reprieve from the insane sanity of the modern world? This path was willingly taken by Professor Antelli of Pierre Boulez's La Planète des Singes, the novel that would spawn the Planet of the Apes franchise. While the 1968 film simplified this plot point by having the Americanized character forcibly lobotomized, the novel sees Antelli revert to an animalistic state over a mere 4 months surrounded by unintelligent humans. Given the short timeline, the novel implies that Antelli willingly gave himself over to the state, sacrificing his human intellect for the peace of life in captivity. Like the developer, Antelli found himself in a world overrun by creatures he considered beneath him, and, like Raymond, he willingly signed away his humanity in exchange for creature comforts bestowed on him by those in power. La Planète des Singes and 1968's Planet of the Apes depict a world where apes have assumed the role of humans, and humans have been reduced to the main targets of hunting and experimentation. But the expanded film franchise explores the origins of this world, posing questions of intelligence and power from every angle. The iconic ending of the original movie implies that human beings destroyed themselves through conflict, presumably nuclear war, a statement on our self-destructive tendencies, and the implication that without a continuity of the cumulative civilization we have built, we have no choice but to become animals. The time-traveling sequel, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, reveals that the apes of the future would rise up against humanity, but that humanity would die by its own hand. Despite subjugating another species to slavery and objectification, the proud human would rather destroy itself than acknowledge its inferiority. This theme is continued in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, where foreknowledge of ape rebellion leads humanity to enslave the apes, keeping them as pets and servants while beating down any sense of rebelliousness, a self-fulfilling prophecy, as it is this treatment that leads the apes to revolution. Whatever Dr. Antele came to understand in the novel was lost on the humans of Conquest, and they forcibly maintained their dominance of the planet in a desperate bid to prop up the house of cards they call a society. In Tim Burton's 2001 reboot of the franchise, the subjugated humans retained their intelligence and ability to speak. While this choice deadens the impact of the original's feral humans, it more closely parallels the themes of colonization present throughout the franchise. Just as the beetles in The House were repopulating a home that they were driven out of, so are the apes reconquering a world they used to dominate. In the real world, the weaker yet more intelligent apes that are Homo sapiens conquered their stronger cousins. In Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, the primates took their planet back. In the reboot series, Rise, Dawn, War, and now Kingdom of the Planet of the apes are inadvertently granted human-level intelligence, that one spark of capability that kept them on the losing end of civilization. Evolution may favor intelligence, but when stronger and more agile creatures are granted human-level brains, they will easily dominate, as in the 2001 film. This is visibly apparent at the end of War, in which the antagonistic humans are wiped out by a landslide, while the apes escape up the trees to safety. The collective loss of our identity as humans is an apocalyptically scary thought, but on a more personal level, it could happen to any of us individually. Injury or trauma could render anyone amnesiac, with only our implicit memories and instinct to remind us who we once were. Millions experience dementia caused by alcoholism, genetic Huntington's, STDs, and other factors. Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, affects 6.7 million Americans over 65 and sits as the fifth leading cause of death in the country, having recently surpassed COVID-19. The ravages of dementia not only leave individuals without memories of their own life, but often without basic human functions, calling into question the distinction between the intelligence of individuals and the intelligence of a species. Ironically, it was a potential cure for Alzheimer's that caused the pandemic in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. The hope of preventing the loss of individual identity resulted in the loss of the collective. Black Mirror's playtest highlights this fear beautifully, as the VR plays with the protagonist's memories of his father's Alzheimer's, removing his cognitive functions as the game maker interrogates him for memories he no longer has access to. He is left with nothing but the most basic human functions, crying out that he doesn't know who he is, and coming to the terrible realization that without intelligence or memories, he is unable to retain his spot among the dominant species. A popular trend in the early days of generative AI saw images rendered with familiar textures but no comprehensible objects, meant to simulate the effects of dementia or a stroke. Being unable to firmly recognize that which humanity has created reminds us that without our civilization, humans are nothing but a big brain in a weak body. Without flexing our collective brains, we risk losing our civilization and intellect to stagnation, and ultimately losing sight of our identity as human beings, like a world where another species usurps our place as king, or like an individual losing their memories and intelligence to the ravages of Alzheimer's. All these moments will be lost in time.
Like tears in rain.
In a future scenario where we have lost our civilization, but not our memories or intelligence, we would be tempted to spend more time reminiscing on humanity's glory days than paving the way for a better world. In the third part of the house, the eponymous structure is seated tenuously on high ground after an apocalyptic flood. Seeming to ignore the rising tide, owner Rosa refuses to believe that her home won't stand for much longer. She tries desperately to keep the house in a functional state while demanding rent from her tenants, despite the circumstances presumably rendering money useless. Rosa can't see the forest for the trees, and her obsession with preserving the house reflects how the species at large might reminisce about their days of domination after a man-made cataclysm or the rebellion of a now-evolved rival. Much like the new master species in Battle for and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Rosa's newest tenant not only flouts her ownership, but repurposes scraps from her broken empire to build an escape route, all while preaching about preserving the soul of the house. Despite being a cat, Rosa is human, and more broadly, she is humanity. While she isn't at risk of losing her mind, she undergoes the same sort of struggle as the developer. A desperate attempt to retain a hold on humanity, that divine spark that was given to her by thousands of years of ancestors yet seems reliant on material wealth. Not until she realizes the importance of camaraderie and resilience does Rosa discover that the house is capable of breaking free of its foundations and traveling across the water. Only when she is willing to sacrifice material possessions and the nostalgic attachment to an untenable home state is she able to not only keep her history alive, but to bring the memory of her culture along. While the unwanted guests in Part 2 invaded the house and reclaimed their place as its indigenous population at the cost of the developer's sanity, the hippie cat from Part 3 convinced Rosa's tenants to abandon the sinking house, leaving her dominant over nothing but empty space and forcing herself to reckon with her own dogmatic pursuit of a past that can never be rebuilt. Although Rosa had to hit rock bottom to realize the truth, she ended up coming out on top. She retained her identity, intelligence, and culture, while the developer drove himself crazy trying to hold on to ill-begotten power, and Raymond and Penny were so willing to sell their humanity for status and material goods that they lost their very form. From the seeds of a slightly stronger brain, we Homo sapiens have built a collection of societies that have grown exponentially and blurred into a monolith that would seem impenetrable to another species, but is, in fact, always struggling to tear itself apart. Stories like Planet of the Apes highlight the unsteadiness of our grasp on this planet. While the reboot series sees the apes rise up as a result of humans trying to retain their grasp on identity and intelligence, the original implies that man destroyed himself, that the struggles of tribalistic culture spelled destruction for our way of life and transformed our once gloriously materialistic civilization into rubble. Nowhere is this better highlighted than in the iconic ending of the original film and its semi-nonsensical retread in the 2001 movie, in which two landmarks of human civilization, specifically the society most likely to spend more time colonizing and conquering than doing anything about the climate crisis, are disturbingly bastardized. The Statue of Liberty, a symbol of freedom and the fortitude of mankind, has been beaten down and left abandoned in the nuclear wasteland. And the Lincoln Memorial, a testament to the great man theory and the godlike stature of those who shaped human culture, has been repurposed into a statue of a villainous alien ape, highlighting how seamlessly another intelligent species could dominate that which we consider a unique identity. Our human identities, both as individuals and as a culture, are constantly at risk of being erased, though we are generally unaware. The more time we spend grafting ourselves with name-brand possessions and following identically in the footsteps of those we find influential, the less time we have to consider who we really are, and who we would really want to be without the blinding glare of consumerism. Easy as it would be to say that we are not evolved enough to manage the civilization we have built, like the genetically enhanced apes of Kingdom who can't quite comprehend the human world that used to exist despite living in its ruins, the truth is much simpler and much darker. We do know, and we are smart enough. Those in our world who hold all the power, influence, and currency have planted their feet on the broken floorboards of our civilization and refuse to acknowledge that we will all be underwater in a few short days. Those of us who struggle uphill to become the individuals we worship, or refuse to acknowledge the external forces keeping us down, will drive ourselves insane grinding towards a future that will never come. And the ones who roll over and acquiesce to the dumbing down of their divine intelligence, selling their one lifetime as an individual for acknowledgement from strangers, well, they won't have to look very hard to accomplish their goals. There's always someone in need of new furniture.